Also, I feel like a lot of times that we feel shame, it's because we are being ignorant. When we feel shame, it's because we are in denial about how much control we actually had. And we're in denial about how vulnerable and malleable we really are, and how much the world and the time that we grew up in and the people around us had an impact on who we became and what life was like for us. I feel like free will and shame are so closely related. When we believe that we have total free will, if you're not living the best life that you can live, if you're not living on the fucking moon, if you're not like doing everything, then you think that there's something wrong with you, or you think that it's all your fault. This is why reading like French philosophers and stuff when I was younger, and they were talking about free will and how we're so free, it scared the fuck out of me. Because I was working at Walgreens. I was not living the life I wanted to live. I used to be obsessed with thinking about determinism versus free will. I've been thinking this, that there's like both, but you can very easily fall into life circumstances and mindsets where you don't have free will. Like, if you believe that you don't have free will, then you don't have it. It's something that's so elusive, and you kind of have to be in a bit of a privileged position. You kind of have to have a certain level of maturity to even comprehend free will. I feel like just the fact that we were born into the world and we're gonna die, and nobody these days hardly lives past 80, especially not 90 or 100. There is a limit to free will. And if you're having a deep human experience and you're experiencing like full range of emotions and a full range of like acceptance of human vulnerability and human limits and grief and all kinds of like stuff, and letting it flow through you, then there's also a limit to free will. I feel like if people gave up the notion that you have free will, then nobody would feel ashamed. No one would feel guilty. And people would have a broader perspective of why they've lived the life that they've lived and how many things were influencing them. I'm thinking about like drugs. If you get high and you get really high, you have now lost the free will to be sober until that phase of life or that like time period just ebbs. So for as long as you're under the influence of a drug, then you don't have free will and your capacity is limited. But you also have access to states of consciousness and dimensions that you wouldn't have access to if you were sober or if you were clean. And I also think about when we want to believe that we have free will, it's not a drug, but it kind of is. Like the culture that you're under, the family system that you're under, the conditions for your existence. Like if you have to work in order to survive, if you can't depend on anyone, then you don't have free will unless you want to like go be homeless and not have shit and then die on the street. I also think about those fringe philosophers that I used to listen to. A lot of them were into politics, and they had the ability to reach a large amount of people with their philosophies, and they had pull in the political sphere. So they would believe in free will, where the average person can challenge authority. Like, the average person doesn't have that kind of pull. So in their situation, they don't really have free will. What was I saying about shame? Shame and pride are the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin. If you can be ashamed of something, then you can also be proud of it. And this is why I stopped letting myself feel proud of things. And I realized that a lot of the circumstances in my life are either because I'm privileged or because I'm not privileged. And it's kind of impersonal. It's not something to be proud of. It's just neutral, and it kind of keeps you from swinging back and forth between pride and shame. I think about in every passing moment, you've always done what you were inclined to do. So when we look back on our lives, or like, I think about people who are alcoholics. And I can be hard on people who are alcoholics because I'm in my own feelings if I have personal relationships with them, because they're hurting me. But if I think about it from a neutral perspective, if an alcoholic looks back on their life and they felt ashamed of how they ruined their body, of how they ruined their relationships, of how they feel like they've lost brain cells, whatever it is, if they were suddenly like 18 or 20 or 25 again, and they had compassion for themselves, they would realize that in every given moment, they were drinking to alleviate the stress of their life at the time. And in every passing day, they were drinking because they believed that it was what they needed to take the edge off of how hard their life was. I think when we look back on our lives with regret, it means that we're in a privileged position, because even if you were smoking crack, even if you were homeless and smoking crack, if you needed crack to get through your day because your life was so hard because you were homeless, then that's what you had to do. And I don't know how mad I am at people I know who have died due to street drug addictions anymore, because if I was living their life and my life was that hard and crack seemed like it was the only thing that would make my life more bearable day to day, because some people are in positions where if they don't do drugs or they don't get drunk, then their life feels so fucking bad that they'll kill themselves that night. So it's like a cost. It's a weighing up the costs of an addiction that you have. If your addiction is preventing you from instant death, or it's preventing you from something that's threatening to overtake you right now, then I think it's not anything to be ashamed of. I think about how, like, homeless people, if I'm giving a homeless person who's fucking homeless my last dollars, I'm giving them $5-10, and they go spend it on crack, I'm glad that you're spending it on something that is helping you survive how hard your life is every day, instead of you doing something like jumping off a bridge that night. So I feel like, and so like bringing it back to when we look back on our lives and we feel ashamed of ourselves, or we feel ashamed of what we've done to ourselves. Like me, sometimes I look back on high school and I feel bad for gaining that much weight, or isolating myself that much, or not taking care of my health. If overeating and watching TV and isolating myself from my friends who fucking abandoned me, and taking that personally and not wanting to talk to anyone new is what was helping me get through how fucking hard high school was, then I'm glad that I did that. Yeah. And if my life was still as hard as it was when I was a teenage girl, I would probably still be doing the same stuff. And I'm in a better position now where I can actually look back on how I lived when I was in high school and feel ashamed. That's a privilege. It means that my life has gotten better to the point where I can even give myself that kind of leeway and that kind of space to think about whether what I did was good for me or not. Like when you're actually in the midst of a really hard situation, you're not thinking about how it's going to impact you in the future, because you're trying to think about how you're supposed to get through the day. So I feel like a lot of shame and regret is just short-sighted. It just means that you aren't seeing the full picture yet. Like you're always going to do in each passing day what you feel is going to get you through. And in some people's cases, their life is so hard that the things that they do to get through the day do end up actually killing them, but at least they made it through that day, and they are living. It seems like it's not right to say it, but they could have died that day 20 years ago before they developed that addiction that helped them get through another 20 years. Like, the emotional, mental aspects of life is so burdensome for a lot of people. Being conscious is such a burden for a lot of people that we expect that we're all going to live into our old age, that it should be easy. But in the modern world, and with how complex human consciousness is, there's no guarantee that people make it out of their own minds in every passing day. So some people living till 40 and then dying of an overdose, or dying of their lifestyle choices. I'm pulling into the driveway. I don't know if anyone's listening to me. For some people, living until 40 will feel like they lived until they're 100, because they were starting out in such a disadvantaged and rough circumstance that they could have died when they were 15. They could have died when they were 20. And so the addictions that lead people to dying young, they lived longer than they were expected to anyway. Thinking this way is helping me grieve my family members, 3 of them who have died in the past year due to complications, due to addictions. They all went through some serious trauma around the time they were 20. They had very rough upbringings, and they lived. Damn, when I look at things from this perspective, I don't really feel bad for them anymore.